the Lord at all times.
Amen.
Shall continually be in my mouth. Giving honor to God and to the spirit of this day, to Pastor Covington and Sister Covington, who are busy in ministry. Pastor Mills, who is not only our executive pastor and our presider for this morning, but a brother beloved who shares with us in many, many ways. I want to return briefly to the scripture that Pastor Mills shared with us from Judges chapter 6. I want to look at verses 16 and 17. It says there, "And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. And Gideon said to the Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak to me." May the Lord add a blessing to this, the reading, the hearing, and the living of his word. I want to talk for a few moments from the subject, God, do me a favor. That's what I want to talk about. God, do me a favor. Is there anybody, I'm curious. Is there anyone that is here that does not need the favor of God on your life? If so, I wish you would stand and identify yourself and give us your secret. Maybe there's someone on this side. Maybe there's someone on this side. I'm running out of options. All right, let me see if I can ask that question a different way. Is there anyone here that feels totally self-sufficient? That you never need a holy hookup. You never need a handout from heaven. That you find yourself never at a place in your life where you are at your wit's end and you need somebody to help you fill in the blanks. Well, since I can't find anybody like that, let me try that a different way. Is there anybody here that needs the favor of God on your life? I'm glad I got some witnesses to that particular question, because the reality is that all of us need the favor of God on our lives. If you don't believe me, just ask Brother Jarrell. He just celebrated, I believe, his 55th birthday. He wouldn't have made it if God wasn't the one that woke him up and set him on his journey. Am I right about it? And every time we look in the mirror, or like somebody said one day, every little step I take, we need the favor of God in our lives. Can I tell you something about God's favor? One of the things about God's favor is that God made certain that his favor was available for humankind a long time ago. Before there was a when or a where or a then or a there, God made certain that God's favor was in place. I like the way Paul talks about it in Ephesians chapter 2 when he says, by grace through faith are ye saved, not of works, lest any man should boast. That's another way of saying that God had already put salvation in place for us. And any person who finds themselves confessing and believing is a candidate for God's favor. And I don't know about you, but that's something that makes me want to shout. That's something that makes me at a place where I feel like running, and I don't run that much anymore. But one of the things about how God's favor is there is that it not only helps me in terms of eternity, but it helps me in terms of everyday living. But it helps me in a way that I can find myself doing stuff beyond myself. Have you ever had something that you needed to do and you didn't have an earthly idea of how you were going to get it done? You didn't know how you were going to raise them bad children. You don't know how you were going to pay them bills that were had because you had more month than you had money. You didn't know how you were going to get through calculus when you couldn't even do arithmetic. You didn't know how you were going to find yourself at a place where you could walk into a job where somebody didn't like you and talked about you every day, and yet you walked in there smiling, kept doing your job, kept doing for your family. Why? Because God's favor was on your life. And there's something about God's favor. Because when God's favor is on us, he allows us to know that he's more than the world against us. When God's favor is on us, he allows us to do that which did not come to us naturally, but supernaturally. God was able to put something in our mind and give us the plans and the folk to help us get the stuff done that we needed to get done. I think about God's favor sometime, and I think about how it says over in the Psalms, it says, let the favor of God be upon us and establish the work of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. You know, when God's favor is on you, sometimes folks will say, how did they get that done? But it's God that established not just the plans, not just the purpose, but for it to actually come to pass. And so for us, we need to know that we got to ask God, do me a favor, because I can't get it done on my own. But when God calls you, he's able to give you what you need. In order to make that point clear this morning, let's take a look at the book of Judges. Judges is an intriguing book to me. It's intriguing because these were not the kind of judges where Judge Brown is, where you sit around in robes and people come and you do adjudication before them. But these were persons who were deliverers. These were persons that served as community saviors, if you will, so that the people of God would find themselves coming back to God and getting out of trouble. And so you find these judges like Barak and Ehud and Deborah and others who were a part of this special clan of people who found themselves sharing in this particular way. But there's something about the book of Judges that really intrigues me. There is a refrain, Reverend Milton, that runs through that book that kind of reminds me of what's happening today in this postmodern world. The refrain, you may remember it, it says, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. Imagine living in a world where you couldn't agree on anything because everybody does what's right in his own. Oh, wait a minute. That's today. But when you turn on the news today, if you turn on Fox, it says one thing. You turn on CNN, it says something else. Turn on MSNBC, it says something else. Then you go to social media and it's got a totally different spin. That's because every person finds themselves wanting to do what is right in their own eyes. And the problem with that is that you can't get anything done. Because we find ourselves in a world where rules don't mean what they used to mean. That people find themselves falling by the wayside because somehow we can't find ourselves talking about the truth. But we talk about, I'm walking in my truth. But can I tell you something? The problem with walking is your truth is that you have to change your mind. Am I right about it? But in the time of the judges, this refrain ran throughout the book, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. They did what was right in their house. They did what was right in their fields. They did what was right in terms of the public square. And they did what was right in terms of worshiping God. But it was only right in their eyes. And so because of that, they kept getting into trouble. And kept getting into trouble. And kept getting into trouble. And can I tell you something? If we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting into trouble. Wish I had time to really unpack that. And so, but by the time you get to chapter 6, they had already gone through a number of different deliverers. They had gone through Deborah and Barak. They were going to spend some time with Samson and the like. But by the time you get to chapter 6, they had an issue that came up with a nation called Midian. And the text says, you can go back and read it, started with verse 1. It starts talking about for 7 years, they found themselves under the thumb of the Midianites. This situation was so bad because they found that their crops were being taken over by the Midianites. They were a people who had crops and they had cattle, but the Midianites came on their camels and they found themselves acting as marauders and those who plundered the land. They took all of their different food stuffs, and it got so bad for the Israelites that they found themselves living in dens and in caves. And so this was a horrible way for them to live. Wait a minute. And I remember as I was reading that text, there were a couple of things that really intrigued me about it. First of all, I found myself intrigued by the fact that they were having this kind of beef with the Midianites. Because when you go back and you read in biblical history, you will discover that there were some significant ties between the Israelites and the Midianites. One of the first tie that we have is the fact that the Israelites, you know, we talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was Israel, but you take that back to Abraham. Well, you may remember that when Abraham's wife Sarah died, he got remarried. Now, yeah, he was an old man. He had a long gray beard, but he got married. And he got married to a woman that was young enough to give him 4 children. Y'all, I ain't making this up. This in the book. It's in the book. He got married to this young woman, this pretty young thing named Keturah. And she had 4 children. She and Abraham had 4 children. And one of those children's name was Midian. Yeah. So the Israelites and the Israelites and the Midianites came out of the same family. They were kinfolk. How many of you know that some folk don't get along with their kinfolk? And they may get along with them for a season, but let somebody cut them off wrong at the bid table, then that season becomes a lost reason. And so they found themselves at a place. And then I think about the fact that you may remember that when Moses got married, Reverend, am I talking right? When Moses got married, his wife Zipporah was from Midian. And her father, Jethro, was a Midian priest, and it was him who gave Moses the scheme to set up a system of judges when they found themselves going through the wilderness. And so, how did they find themselves at a place where they fell out so badly that they were now the oppressors of the Israelites? Well, they fell out because when you go back, you discover that even during the time of Moses, that Moses came and plundered their land. And that had been some 200 years prior, and they just waited. They just waited. And they waited. So now that the children of Israel had been messing up, God said, all right, I got something for you. I'm going to let the Midianites get you straight. How many of you know that sometimes the trouble that we get into, that God allows some things to happen to us because we have been messing up? I told you that they were the people who said we can do whatever we want to do. You know, it was like that old song, "It's your thing. You can do what you want to do." Some of y'all know it. You can't tell me who to sock it to. And that's how they were living, and God said, I got something for you. And so the Midianites come with their camels, and they come with their marauding bands. And it's interesting when you read the text, it said that there were so many of them. It was like they could not be numbered. Have you ever had trouble to show up and it's like one trouble after another, after another, after another, after? It just seems like you aren't going to get out of trouble. You get the plumbing fixed, and then the electricity goes out. And then the electricity goes out, and then you got a hole in your roof. And then you got a hole in your roof, and then somehow you got peeling paint in the house. And then all of a sudden, then it seems like the HVAC is going out. And then it seems like your dog won't do right. And then the cat is having kittens, and everything is messing up. One trouble after another. You get sick in your body. Your hand hurts. Your back hurts. Your leg hurts. Your hair is turning gray and falling out. It seems like one thing after another. That's what it was like. That's what it was like for the Israelites. And it was so bad, it was so bad, it was so bad that they felt like they could not do their work in the light of day. And so by the time you get to chapter 6 and you begin to look at this son of Joash, Gideon, what was he doing? He was taking wheat and preparing it. But he wasn't doing it in the middle of the field. He wasn't doing it in public. He was doing it under the cover of a shelter. And the reason he was doing that was he didn't want the Midianites to see what he was doing. Yeah, he was doing the right thing, but he was an undercover brother at that time. And in so doing, here he is. He's doing his work. And I can imagine that he was thinking about all of the stuff that had happened. And I could hear him in my mind's eye singing, "Stony the road we tried, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died." Can you imagine? Here he is. He's going through all of this, and he's singing spirituals. He's singing blues. He's doing all of this kind of stuff. And somebody shows up. He doesn't recognize the person. But the person shows up and starts addressing him in a most unusual manner. Oh, mighty man of valor, you gonna save Israel. Imagine you tore up from the floor up. Imagine your enemies have left you bloody and bruised. Imagine you have gone through so much life experience. You wonder, why has God forgotten us? And better still, why don't you send us some help? And somebody walks up to you and say, you the help. And so Gideon finds himself saying, you got jokes. Why would you say this thing to me? And this person said, no, you're the one who's going to save Israel. You're the one who's going to get it done. And he finally says, if this is for real, Lord, if this is you, just do me this favor. Show me a sign. And stay here till the sign is done. That way, if it doesn't happen, then I can go on about my business. And the Lord said, okay, I'll do that. And so the first sign that was sent is he went and he prepared an altar and put some food on the altar. And God sent some fire and burned it up. He said, well, wait a minute, if he can do that, then, and not only did he do that, but he burned it up on the altar of Baal. And see, Baal was the local deity that was there, the false deity that was there, the idol that they were worshiping. That was part of why they were in so much trouble. They were worshiping the wrong God. Can I tell you something? In these days where everybody does what's right in your own eyes, you better watch who you're worshiping. And so here, God did that for him. But then they found themselves looking, and he said, well, that's good. And he said, well, tear down the altar of Baal. And he did that under the cover of night. And he didn't do it during the daytime because he didn't want to go through all that smoke. But he did it, and they came and they found him, and they were going to kill him, but his daddy stood up and said, no, don't kill him. And so then he found himself totally empowered. Now, I'm out of chapter 6 now. I'm in chapter 7. I'll get to chapter 7 and chapter 8. But then he found himself at a place where they needed to run the Midianites and the Amalekites out of the land. But he had said that I don't have enough, but he was able to do it. So how was he able to do it? Because God's favor was on his life. There's just several things I want to look at in terms of this text. First thing I want to look at in terms of God's favor being on his life is this. Gideon was not looking for God. God was looking for Gideon. Can I tell you something? God is looking for you. He's looking for his children, and sometimes we're always looking at somebody else to get things done, but God finds himself looking for you. Can I take you to Bible country for a minute? When Jesus called the disciples, they didn't call Jesus. Jesus went and he found them. When Isaiah found himself looking at his own sinful circumstance in Isaiah chapter 6, it said that in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. He was going through, and yet God looked up and showed him and called him and said, who will go for us and who will we send? God has a way of looking for who he wants. When I think about David in terms of him becoming the king of Israel, he didn't go and fill out an application at the employment office and say, I want to be monarch of Israel. No, Samuel came to his house and he looked over all the rest of the boys and said, they look nice, but the Lord said, move on. He's not the one. And he had to go out yonder in the field and find him and say, he's the one that God is looking for. Sometimes God ain't going to find us on the top of the mountain, but he knows where to find you. He knows how to get you. He knows where you are. He knows your address. And so I want to tell you today that if God has something for you, just find yourself saying, Lord, I don't know what you got for me, but I'm yours, Lord. Everything I've got, everything I am, everything I'm not, I'm yours, Lord. So the Lord came and looking for Gideon, and he found him. But I don't want you to miss this in the text. You know, when sometimes you think the Lord comes and touches and gets folk and they jump up and they get all excited and they run on and they do exactly what the Lord wants. Some folk might be that way. But can I tell you, most of us, we find ourselves pushing back. And there's a few reasons why we push back. Sometimes we push back because we're so limited, have such a limited view of ourselves. We have such a limited view of ourselves. So some folk can't get anything done because they would not believe that God would do anything through them. Because we're always looking at somebody else. That's what Martin King does. This is Black History Month. We talk about the Martin King. We talk about the Frederick Douglasses. We talk about the Nanny Helen Burroughs. We talk about all these great folks who started where we started. But we don't look at that and we say, no, it can't be me. So sometimes that's why we find ourselves letting God pass us by. Because we said God couldn't possibly be interested in me. But can I tell you something about you? You are wonderfully and fearfully made. And because you're wonderfully and fearfully made, God knows who you are. He knows the hairs on your head. He knows every drop of blood that courses through your veins. He knows your down sitting and your uprising. Yeah, he knew about those crazy thoughts that you had, but he also knew some good thoughts that you had that came in your mind. God is looking for you, but sometimes folk push back. I look at Gideon. He had his list. The man said, I'm looking for you and you're a mighty man of valor. He said, no, you can't be looking for me. The reason you can't be looking for me is that, first of all, I am from the tribe of Manasseh. Now, those of you who are Bible readers and you started going down the list of the sons of Jacob and you talked about Joseph and Benjamin and Dan and Naphtali and Reuben and Gad and Levi and all them folks, you say, I don't see a Manasseh there. But Manasseh was actually the grandson of Jacob because he was the son of Joseph. When you go back and you read, I believe it's in Genesis chapter 49, you'll discover that when Joseph got ready to go before Jacob, he took his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he put them there and said, these can be as your sons. And so there were these two half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. And so when Gideon said, I'm from Manasseh, I'm not even from a full tribe, y'all. And I'm just from a half tribe. And the reason that was significant is that he was saying that if I'm in a fight, I ain't got as many folk as them other folk got. Why are you calling on me? But you know, sometimes God has a way of looking at what we think of as numbers, but he does math differently. Yes, he does. We do arithmetics, but he does exponents. We find ourselves looking at stuff one way, but God has a way of putting some other stuff in there. But he was talking about, I'm from the half tribe of Manasseh. I can't do that. And then he said, I'm even from the least of the families in this half tribe. Have you ever found yourself, don't raise your hand, but have you ever said, I can't do this because of my family past? They know Junebug in them, and they ain't going to give me no chance. Have you ever been somewhere and somebody said, are you in so-and-so family? And you try to find out why they asking that first? Y'all ain't had to do nothing like that. Y'all ain't had to do, but I have. And he said, no, I'm from a half a tribe. My family ain't got all that. We weren't born with a silver spoon in our mouth. We don't have. And the Lord listened to all of that and said, but you the one. And sometimes the excuses we have, when you take the excuses that you have for why you can't and you shine the light of God's favor on them, you'll find that they all disappear. So he found himself saying, all right, maybe these excuses don't work, but I'm going to make sure. Give me a sign. And you find throughout his time, he asked for these signs. He asked, first of all, for this food to be burned up, and then he asked for the sign. I love to talk about the fleece and how he looked at how you had the fleece on the ground, and he wanted the ground to be wet and the fleece dry, and then he asked for it another way, wanted the ground to be wet and the fleece dry, and vice versa. And that thing, I understand that. Have you ever knew that there was something that you were called to and that you were supposed to do, but you said, I don't know. God, I'm not doubting you, but I'm doubting me. I know my issues. I know the stuff I don't like to do. Lord, I know my issues. I know my weaknesses. I know the places. And you find yourself saying, Lord, you can't possibly want to invest in, through, and around me. God, you need somebody else. You need somebody taller. You need somebody who looks better. You need somebody who's thinner. You need somebody who's got bigger muscles. You need somebody who's smarter than me. You need somebody who's got some more money than me. You need somebody who's got more hookups than me. You need somebody who's got more education than me. And yet the Lord said, no, I got the right one. And sometimes when you're unsure, just ask God for a sign. Ask him to make it crystal clear to you that you are the one for this moment. Amen. Can I tell you something about me? Some of y'all have heard me tell this before, but when I was struggling with ministry, some 47 plus years ago, almost 48 years ago, I wasn't sure. I really wasn't. And I asked the Lord at one point to give me a sign. Now, here was the interesting thing about it. The Lord had already had folk come up and tell me things. I knew what I felt in my heart. He had people call me up out of congregations and places that I didn't know them. And I still found myself saying, Lord, is it I? Lord, you couldn't possibly want me. Because I had some other things I wanted to do, George. I was on my way. I was going to go to undergrad, major in business, find myself minoring in music. Then I was going to go to law school. And then I was going to become a corporate lawyer and make plenty of money. I had a plan. And when the Lord said ministry, I said, no, can't be me. Nope, not me. And I thought about something my brother said when I told him I thought I might be called a priest. He said, no, you priest? No, the Lord is not desperate. My baby brother, who I shared a room with coming up all these years, he said, no, the Lord is not desperate. He knew me. He said, the Lord is my shepherd, and he don't want you. But I knew what I felt. And so I asked him for a sign. And one of the things I asked him for at one point was I asked him to let my pastor know what was going on in me, because it had been prophesied over me earlier. And I said, if my pastor, who's in Chicago, this prophecy had happened in Nashville, Tennessee. I said, if my pastor knows what happened to me in Nashville, then I know that this thing is for real. Wait a minute, why are you going to test the Lord like that? But I did. And when I saw my pastor and I walked up to him and we exchanged greetings and then he didn't say nothing to me, Willie, and I said, Reb, I need to talk to you about something. And he says to me, what you gonna do about it? I said, what do you mean, what am I gonna do about it? He said, it's not. I said, it's not what I want to do, it's what somebody wants me to do. He said, son, it's no use in us playing cat and mouse with each other. I told the congregation Sunday 2 members of the church were called to preach. I didn't tell them who they were, but you one of the 2. And I was like, I said, well, what should I do? He said, don't worry about it. And next thing I knew, I was doing trial sermon and all that stuff. And my head is still swimming, thinking about the different things that have happened in my life as a result of me dealing with that. But I wasn't sure. So I had to ask the Lord. And I'm taking my time with that because there's some stuff that somebody here is wrestling with. And you're thinking about your past, and you're thinking about what this one is saying. You thinking you got all the questions in your mind, but let me tell you something. Go to the one who's got the answer to your questions. And say this to him, Lord, help my unbelief. Am I in Bible country when I say that? And say to him, Lord, if I don't get it, show me something to help me get it. You know, the way that somebody else gets it, they may not do like I do. So I need you to tell me like I understand. And guess what? He will break it down to you exactly like there's one final thing I want to talk about. There's a lot in this text. But one of the things that I found myself just so intrigued by is the fact that their major problem that caused the Midianites to come on them was the fact that their worship was messed up. That worship was messed up. They were find themselves, they were worshiping idol gods. They found themselves looking at that. And the very first thing that Gideon had to do once he accepted his empowerment, he drove out the Amorites and the Midianites. And I wish I had time to talk about that. But I want to talk about how he got worship right. He got worship right. He went and he tore down the altars of Baal. Now, I mentioned before that when he did it initially, he had to find himself in a place where he was doing it under the cover of night. But he went and he did that so that they could find themselves not worshiping an idol, but worshiping the true and the living God. Let me tell you something. If you want to ever reach the favor of God in your life, worship him. Talk to him. If you ever want to get to where you need to get in life, worship God. If you ever want to find yourself discovering your divine destiny, find yourself involved in worship. How do you worship? Well, first of all, you find yourself falling down before him and saying, Lord, I know I'm a sinner, but I know that I can be saved by grace. Lord, thank you for saving my soul. How do you worship him? You find yourself engaged in praise before him and thanking him for what he's done for you. Sometimes folks say, I can't praise him because I don't have the testimony that other folks have. But guess what? You've got a testimony. Because everything that you do because God's favor is on you. Everything that you do is because God's grace courses through you. Every door that opens is because God was the one that allowed that door to be open. Some of those doors that got shut, that were the wrong doors, it was God that shut them. I'm talking about God's grace. And when God's grace comes upon you, he empowers you so that you can do things that you cannot do on your own. You'll see things that you cannot see on your own. You'll be able to run and not be weary. You'll walk and not faint. You'll find yourself able to get things and hook up with folk that you didn't even know, but they were looking for you. Why? Because God's grace was on you. So God, do me a favor. You don't ask somebody to do you a favor that doesn't have the power to grant it. You have to ask somebody who actually has what you need. And guess what? Somebody said it like this: he's got all power in his hand. And so he can do those things. As I make ready to close, I was thinking about a songwriter named Dottie Rambo. She wrote a number of songs that have blessed the body of Christ. But one day she found herself going to visit her brother. She went to the hospital to see her brother. And this brother happened to have an advanced form of cancer. And she was asking God to spare his life, but she also wanted him to come to Christ in case he made it to the other side first. And so she talked to him about it, and he said, God couldn't possibly want me. I've done too much. I know we were raised up in church, and I walked away from it. So God does not want me. He said, I spend too much time on the street drinking and drugging, thieving and thugging. He could not possibly want me. He doesn't want me because I turned my back on God and I knew better. And it was like he was singing the first line of that old hymn, I wandered far away from God. But he hadn't figured out the part, Lord, I'm coming home yet. Yeah. But she prayed for him. And she prayed for him. And she left. And she came back. And after she prayed for him, when she came back, found himself saying, I yield. Yeah. I'm going to give my life back to Christ. And he did that. And he ended up going home, but he went home with the assurance that his hand was in the hand of the Lord. And so she found herself looking at that experience and looking at what her brother said and looking at at life, and she ended up writing these words: Amazing grace shall always be my song of praise, for it was grace that bought my liberty. I do not know how Jesus came to love me so, but he looked beyond my faults and saw my needs. Let me tell you something. He looked at your faults and my faults, and yet he saw the fault, but he also saw what you could become. He saw the fault, but he saw the place where you were able to stand up and do what was right. He saw the fault, but he was able to see all of the potential that was there for you. And so, I don't know about you, but every day of my life, I'm saying, God, do me a favor. Because I need your grace. I need your hand of mercy. I need your lavish love upon me. I need what you have. God, do me a favor. One of the things we do here in God's church is to open the doors of the church. Now, the reason we do that is because it gives brothers and sisters who are on the journey a formal opportunity to come forward. Sometimes we come to services and there's this thought that everybody here has already made a decision for the Lord. And that would be a nice thing. But sometimes people are struggling. Sometimes people have found themselves at a place where they thought about it, but they just haven't made that public declaration. So as we find ourselves standing, if God is speaking to you, or if you find yourself in our social sanctuary and God is speaking to your heart, we invite you to write on the Connect card and we'll have somebody to call you. But as the choir leads us in this great song of faith, if you're here, we invite you to come forward.